I suppose I have to start with certain assumptions. To me, a labour movement without the two arms, the industrial and the political, is not very effective. Unions without politics are relatively ineffective, and a political party that's supposed to represent the working class without the trade union movement is certainly, in my opinion, less effective. I'm supposed to talk today about trade unions and the law. Well, Conor, I know, we discussed this in the pub, and he doesn't agree with everything I say, which is very foolish. But, I just want to talk briefly about trade unions and the law. This guy wrote a book in the 60s, and the first sentence was, the workers, what they want of the law is that it should leave them alone. And certainly that's been the tradition in these islands, the tradition of voluntarism, that workers and their trade unions and employers negotiated collective agreements without state interference. And certainly that's been the tradition. But that tradition now is really under attack. Since we went into the EU, there's lots of pieces of legislation, mostly aimed at the individual worker. But there's also, of course, collective legislation, which I want to talk about later. But there's no doubt that there's an increasing trend towards legal intervention in industrial relations, juridification, as the academics call it. In my opinion, it's not a good thing. Now, it may be irreversible, but it's not a good thing. And it's a challenge to trade unions, especially with regard to collective labour law, because when you think of it, you think about the judiciary, their assumptions. They've got these 19th century laissez-faire assumptions that workers and employers, or the worker and the employer, they meet in the labour market as equals, which is absolutely nonsensical. They're not equals. There's great power on the part of the employer, much less power on the part of the individual worker. So, it's a nonsense. Nevertheless, that drives the ideology of the judiciary. So they're never going to be sympathetic, really, to collectives, to trade unions. They prefer to deal with individual cases. Trade unions act in restraint of trade. And, these are all 19th century notions, but recent developments actually would suggest that they're still very much alive. Now, that's all talk, but if we want to give a practical example, is the 1990 Act. Now, unlike in Britain, under Thatcher, there was 16 pieces of legislation introduced, all designed to weaken trade unions. They were introduced without any reference or consultation with unions, and naturally they were just sort of passed through by a sort of fairly hostile state. Now, in this country, the 1990 Act, you couldn't say it was passed by a hostile state, actually, that the trade unions were involved in negotiation and in sort of consultation with the government about the Act. And so we can say that the 1990 Act was imposed by a hostile state. And so there's certain responsibility on the trade union movement, to have made a good job of it. Now, I'm afraid they made a little bit of a mess. For instance, they were promised by the politicians when the bill was going through the Dáil and going through the Senate, they were promised that only a member of a union, they were told, could mount a challenge to the outcome of a secret ballot. Nobody else outside the trade union movement could mount a challenge to the secret ballot. They were also told that the availability of immunities, these immunities come from the 1906 Act, which says that anything done in pursuit of a trade dispute, provided it's not criminal in itself, will be free from criminal or civil prosecution. So the immunities, was not dependent. These immunities were not dependent on the holding of a secret ballot. And thirdly, ex parte injunctions. That's an injunction taken out by the employer without the union being there. They couldn't be entertained where a secret ballot was held. These promises, or the assumptions, they counted for nothing in the end. Each one of those items, once the judges got hold of the sort of 1990 Act and it was up for sort of interpretation, the immunities became dependent on holding a ballot. The judges granted injunctions in spite of holding a ballot. All these things were reversed. How the ballot was conducted. It was only trade union members who could be interested in how the ballot was conducted. No. the judiciary said, oh, no. Employers have to be interested in how the ballot is conducted. The Nolan Transport case was an example. Now, after the Nolan Transport, people believed that things were going to settle down. Things were going to settle down. Actually, they got worse. And the latest case, in 2014, SIP2 versus Dublin Airport Authority and Ryanair, an injunction was granted. The strike was postponed, even though the union, SIP2, had gone through all the sort of procedures, the holding of the ballot, etc., etc. That wasn't all. The strike was postponed. It was postponed because the judge said that he had difficulties about the conduct of the ballot and the legal validity, etc., etc. See, that was the big mistake. Once you open that to judicial interpretation, you're in trouble, and especially if the judiciary isn't that really sympathetic. And not only that, Aer Lingus then launched legal proceedings seeking damages of multiple millions from SIP2 and a named union official. Now, this is back to pre-1906. It's quite incredible, really. And what's really incredible to me is that actually there's been very little disturbance about it or agitation about it, or people seem to be, in the union movement at any rate, they're saying nothing, which I find quite incredible, though people here might be able to enlighten me why this is the case. And then there's the last, so in my opinion, the 1990 Act needs amendment or repeal because it's really been a bit of a disaster, really. And given that unions are so important, in my opinion, they're so important for working people, without a union, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. You're in big trouble. You're at the mercy of the employer and you've no comeback. It's as simple as that. Look, there are all sorts of difficulties and things that arise from all this, but I've only got 5 minutes, so I have to...
You've got a lot less than that now.
Oh, have I? Okay. I just wanted to talk briefly about union recognition and what is to be done. You know, that whether we should go a legal route or what should be done, really. But that's open for discussion, actually. That's open for discussion. But just the final thing, just the hostility, really, of the judiciary to unions. In the Ryanair case, it went to the High Court, and the High Court said that Ryanair, the policy conducted by the management of Ryanair was tyrannical. That was the judgment in the High Court. When it went to the Supreme Court found in favour of Ryanair. We won't go into all the complications of it, but the judiciary then went on to give an opinion. Now, some people in the union movement have seen it as a definitive. It's not definitive at all, it's just an opinion. But an employer is entitled not to deal with trade unions, and a law cannot be passed compelling him to do so. Now, you know, why is then Ireland unique? You've got these laws in Britain, you've got them in Canada, you even got them in America. You know, Canada has a constitution. You know, why should we be unique that we could never have a law passed on union recognition? You know, look, it's a pretty dire sort of outlook, I think, and nevertheless, we just need to get our heads together and see what, if anything, can be done. Okay, comrades, did I finish in my 5 minutes? Okay.